The Bloc Québécois offers an ultimatum to the Liberal Party. Is Trudeau in trouble? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. As we've outlined in a previous episode, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, is once again in hot water over another ethics scandal. It's really no surprise at this point. This is his whole MO, a proclivity to be caught up in issues, and I have to admit, it is pretty saddening because Trudeau was growing on me. I really liked the way he was handling the pandemic. He's done a tremendous job, and he was doing quite well in earning my support. But here we are again where he seems to just drag himself down into the mud, and I'm back in the middle on him. Not super convinced, but also not sure that what the Bloc is doing is the best approach. This week, Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, publicly declared that if Trudeau, his chief of staff, and the finance minister don't resign, he will force an election this fall, which can happen given the minority government situation. Essentially an ultimatum. Trudeau and your team, resign, make way for a new leader, or we're going to try and force that upon you. I don't want to downplay whatever the severity of the accusation is, but coming from the Bloc, it is kind of comical. A smallish party threatening the ruling prime minister that they're going to force an election. Well, as we'll get into it, they don't have the power to do that alone. They need support. I'm not too sure that's likely, but first of all, let's clear something up. All three of these people, who the Bloc are targeting, are caught up in the WE scandal, and probably some more as well. I don't want to linger on that too much because we talked about it already, but they're not innocent individuals. In fact, it's probably the opposite. They're very powerful, they are very smart, and seemingly they are corrupt. They've used their position to further their own interest, or they've been complicit in other people doing so. It's not good coming from these high-ranking government officials. The crazy thing to me, though, is that it seems like if there was ever a time to get caught up in another scandal, that would be it. Because the general public is very focused on one thing, and that's COVID-19. The pandemic and what it's doing to our world. Whether it's losing your job, having your employment insurance essentially running out. Well, not the EI, it's the CERB, and it's turning into EI. But whatever the focus of your life is right now, it's heavily correlated to COVID-19. That's it. That's your entire purview. And Trudeau getting caught up in a WE scandal, giving out contracts that seem to be kind of sketchy, might not be at the top of your list of priorities right now. When people are so entrenched in the horrors of their daily lives, it's hard for them to pay attention to the finer details of the political landscape. But even given all of those realities, according to the Toronto Sun, support for the Liberal Party has fallen to 30%, which is below the Conservatives at 33%. And that's with the Conservatives not really even having a leader right now. Scheer is resigned, he's about to leave, and their internal election has yet to finalize. Regardless of how well the poll was conducted, you should always take these results with a grain of salt though. If you remember, back during the election, it was saying that the Liberals and the Conservatives were neck and neck, they're very close together, the Cons might even win a minority, and in reality it wasn't that close. The Liberals had a comfortable margin pretty much the whole way through. If you do want to take these polls at face value though, you could interpret them as saying that the average Canadian is seeing all the troubles with the Liberal Party, and they are slowly bringing back their support. They're saying, well, we do appreciate all you've done during COVID, but some of the ethical disasters that have unfolded here are a bit too much, and that could be leading to the opportunism that we're seeing from the Bloc, thinking that now is a great time to spring an election. This ultimatum from the Bloc poses some questions though. For example, is it even possible? Further, is it realistic? What are the strategy considerations here? Does Trudeau even deserve to be removed, etc.? So, let's start from the top. How exactly can you force another election? Is that even possible? Is it legal? The short answer is yes, it is possible, it is legal, and it's been done before. The long answer involves explaining a vote of confidence. Further, a vote of no confidence. First of all, there are 338 members of Canadian Parliament at the federal level. If the majority of these people don't consent to having Trudeau around as the boss anymore, they can pass the motion, the vote of no confidence. It calls for the PM to resign, and two things can happen after that. The most common outcome is hosting another general election where Canadians like you and me will go out there and will vote for a leader. Pretty much like what happened just not too long ago. Then, the second outcome that could happen is separate. In this case, the Governor General would invite another party to try and form government. That would still require the parliamentary majority support to actually happen. Now, as you've probably already caught on to, this is one major reason why parties strive to get a majority government every election. They get to avoid having to deal with these votes of no confidence because, by dint of being a majority government, they control over half the seats already. It makes it impossible to pass a no confidence vote because they themselves would have to be a part of it, because they have the majority of the seats. You can't get a majority without them. Theoretically, the only way that could still happen is if some voters didn't go along with the party. If, for example, you have a majority government, but some constituents who have a seat, one of the 300 plus, decides to vote against you, then it could happen. But in Canadian politics, that doesn't really go on. People tend to stick to what the boss says, and I actually find that to be very unfortunate. There really isn't much independent thought that goes on once these people are in their seat. They might say a lot of things during their campaigning when they're trying to get your vote, but once they're in office, they're going to toe the line. They're going to do what Trudeau says, what Andrew Scheer says, what Jagmeet Singh says, and that's the bottom line here. Because if they don't go with that, they can face consequences, maybe get shunned, maybe not get assigned to a nice portfolio. A lot of things can go wrong. There's a cost for being independent thinking when you're in this group environment. This here is an interesting observation because many of the issues that we see within society are really just representations of things that go on at the governmental level. That's really the case of a couple of things like groupthink and an echo chamber. If you're in the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, you are expected to always vote as a Liberal and a Conservative. You don't really have the freedom to think and vote as you want to be autonomous. If Trudeau says something that you don't agree with, well, that's tough luck for you. You, as a Liberal member of Parliament, don't really have the agency to go against that, to say, hey, wait, although you are the leader of the party and the Prime Minister, I just don't agree with whatever's being said, and therefore I'm going to vote with my conscience. That rarely happens because it does come with a cost, as I've laid out. You will be shunned by those head honchos, and you won't be leading a very fruitful political career. Once you are elected into the party, you become the party. You think like the party, and you vote with the party. That's funny because the person who dictates what the party represents is the leader, and this line of thinking posits that they are infallible, that they are going to make the best choices all the time. And you trying to say something contrary to that is not productive because it'll do some things like, number one, weaken the party. There'll be divides internally, but once again, that's part of what makes the government good. To have debates about good ideas and bad ideas when it becomes so black and white that if you are a Liberal, you're always going to vote for what the Liberal head says. If you are a Conservative, you're always going to vote for what they say. It takes away from some of the mechanisms that ensure good ideas get through and the bad ones get filtered out. Because if you are a majority government, you really can do whatever you want because you know internally there will be no resistance. You can pretty much do whatever you want. Obviously, within logical boundaries, you can't start a genocide or something. But even if something is great, it'll likely go through because nobody's going to be there to question you. And that's terrible. It's a failure of liberal principles in my mind to be open to debate and free speech and to give members of parliament the right to freely speak their mind without this thing looming over their head, these undue consequences. Instead, you end up with things like groupthink and this fervent loyalty to a party that really hasn't done anything to earn it. You're just playing along because that is what is expected of you. I would much rather have these members of parliament be free thinkers, almost like an independent. Sure, you can have your party. All it really symbolizes is that you guys think somewhat similarly. You hold some core values together, but of course you're going to differ on the application of them. Of course there's going to be nuance there, and I want to hear about it. I want to see you guys fight it out and find truly the best answer to things, not just go along with the party lines because it's convenient. Anyways, I digress. Now back to the topic at hand. The last time a vote of no confidence actually happened was in 2011, so not too long ago. Stephen Harper's party, the Conservatives, lost the House confidence, but the vote actually backfired. Harper ended up winning the new election with a majority government. he went from a minority to a majority. I'm not too sure the people would have still done the re-election if they knew that would be the outcome. So, as you can see, anything can happen. You can end up in the exact same situation with a minority government with the same leader that you tried to get rid of, or you could give them a majority. Or you could get a whole new leader and the parties could be rejigged however they play out. Interestingly enough, in 1974, Trudeau's father was also hit with a no confidence vote. Just some trivia. So thus far, just to recap, we've established that it's in fact possible. What the Bloc is saying could happen. If they really wanted to, they could try to force a new election and get rid of Trudeau. But the next question is this warranted? Does Trudeau deserve to have his term prematurely cut short? Assuming that would be the outcome. Of course, it could go the other way. He could win again and get a majority, but let's assume, based on the polling data, which isn't, of course, always accurate, that Trudeau would lose. This poses a tricky question. Does he deserve to have that happen to him? Many people love Trudeau because he has this facade of wokeness and modern leftist principles, but when it comes to actually running the country, there are some question marks here. He's no stranger to scandal, as you already know. You have SNC, where he's pressuring the Attorney General unduly to get an outcome that he wants to see. You have the We Charity, where he's dishing out funds and contracts in sketchy ways that probe an ethics investigation. He was even accepting private vacations from Aga Khan, which of course is an ethics infringement. The core thread here seems to be that if Trudeau likes you, he's willing to break certain rules to do things in your favor. He did like SNC, they were a part of his home riding in Quebec, so he stuck his neck out to try and save them. The We Charity. His wife and his family have very close relations with them, so he may have given them a leg up in the contract awarding process, and Aga Khan, that may have been his buddy. Of course he's okay with visiting this private island and racking up public debt to fund whatever it is that he bought there. So, this is the pattern that Trudeau has established for himself. You would think that after being busted once, you would either stop looking for trouble as the Prime Minister, or you would get better at hiding it. Neither of these things has happened though. He's still up to his same foolishness. That leads me to believe that one of these two possibilities is true about Trudeau. Either he's willfully corrupt, and he's using his influence to manifest the outcomes he personally wants to see, while hiding behind the veil of wokeness, whether that's saving SNC to help his reputation, or helping out some buddies at We and whatnot. The other outcome that's possible is that he is an oblivious derp, that he doesn't know what he's doing, and he keeps falling into these traps because he doesn't know any better. He really could be that silly. I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate a sitting Prime Minister's intelligence. You have to have some brains to run a country, and he's been doing it for quite some time now. Either way though, regardless of where you want to fall on that debate, this isn't ideal for a Prime Minister. To be so entrenched in scandals regardless of the reason is not a good look. It makes Canada look corrupt. It makes the party look rather unworthy of leadership. It doesn't do much for Trudeau's rep either. And I don't believe it's a shocker either. That's the hard truth here. We knew this about him before he was re-elected. That was in the midst of the SNC issue. He wouldn't own up to it. He was trying to divert things. But we all know, Trudeau and ethics, there's always been a complicated relationship there. It would be very different if someone with a clean slate was implicated with these conflicts, but with Trudeau, perhaps we've become somewhat numb to it. That really is my biggest grievance with him, the seeming lack of character. And I must admit, some of the scandals that he's been a part of I don't feel were even warranted. Some of them were, some weren't. The blackface, for example, that was obviously an election plant. The timing was too perfect, the intention was clear to see, to try and tank him, to expose the hypocrisy of his so-called wokeness, and, these things are just not legitimate ways to bring down somebody. They are personal attacks that don't reflect the character of Trudeau. For somebody to be making the claim that Trudeau was racist because he wore that costume and he painted his face, I don't really buy it. Look at Trudeau's record and his history and what he stood for supposedly. Nothing there adds up. But to still run with the narrative, it shows there's an agenda there. You should also look at Trudeau's character. It seems more possible to me that he really is the derp in the situation. That he actually had no idea what was going on and he thought it would be a great idea to get dressed up. He was a drama teacher or an art teacher before, right? This could just be him. But once again, I digress. There are other good things to talk about when mentioning Trudeau. I believe that Trudeau handled the COVID pandemic excellently. Canada is in amazing shape compared to other parts of the world. It's not even close. Of course we aren't the best, but we are nowhere near the bottom as well, and he deserves to get credit for that, along with the premiers. Has been overall a great response. Trudeau has also shown a willingness to work with other countries as made evident via deals like the USMCA. Of course, he was a little bit slow to get to the table. There was a very, very real risk there that Canada would be excluded because of the lag, but at the end of the day, things worked out, and he was at the table discussing it when it came down to it. He's also tried to stand up for Canada on the world stage, not caving into China's numerous asinine requests, so there is some things to be celebrated here. They could have definitely been a lot worse. He could have gave in. He could have tried to run away from the deal-making process, which would have hurt Canada. I don't think having Trudeau around is the worst thing in the world, especially if the alternative is shaking the government up in the middle of a pandemic. With Trudeau, you know what you're going to get. He likes to virtue signal. He's probably going to post some center-left agenda items. He's going to be caught up in ethics scandals. His judgment won't be the best. He might look a little bit weak on the world stage, but he won't destroy the country. Now, on the other hand, I can just imagine the legislative nightmare that would be if a new government came to power in the middle of a pandemic. If a new party comes up, they would need to review everything that the Liberals have done thus far. They would likely want to change things here and there and put their own branding on it, and we would lose the continuality here. Undoubtedly, that would have negative consequences. There wouldn't be a consistent flow of the plan anymore. It might get torn up, it might get reconfigured, and I'm not too sure we want to be dealing with that change right now, especially when the current plan has been pretty good. I am kind of choosing the lesser of the two evils here. Trudeau, the corruption scandal addict, or bringing more uncertainty in already uncertain times. I think I'll take Trudeau here. And that's kind of sad to say, but those are the cards we've been dealt. If times were more stable, and we had an actual leader running the opposition who I believed in, that might be a different story. Personally, I can't say I support the Bloc's idea at this point in time. That then brings me to the next question, which is, regardless of my personal stance, is this still likely to happen? Could we see it go down? Well, let's look at the Parliament. You would need a majority of the votes to pass a no confidence motion. The Bloc alone can't do anything. They only have 32 seats. Now, let's say the Bloc convinces the Conservative Party to join in. Guess what? They still can't do anything because that only totals 153 seats. You would need something like 169 or 170. That means you would need a third party to support the motion. You'd have to bring in the NDP. There's no other choice there. First of all, I don't see the Conservatives jumping into this plan. They don't even have a leader yet. They would look unorganized and rush into an election. The Canadian people might end up giving Trudeau a majority in that case. The Conservatives really want to clean house. They want to establish a reputation of being poised and established, which is what they traditionally rely upon. At this point, they're not ready for it. They would be much better served just waiting it out, building up their reputation, getting a competent leader in place, and getting ready for the next federal election. Not trying to force one early. Now, the NDP. For all the hate they give Trudeau, which, you can see where it's coming from, they compete closely for a very identical voter base, they would still much rather work with Trudeau than the Conservative Party. They'd much rather have the Liberals be the minority government than have the Conservatives there. If the Liberals fall, the Conservatives will get it. That's how things work here. The Bloc and the NDP are really only looking for who they want to work with more closely. We're not going to have the NDP be the new Prime Minister or the Bloc producing one either. It's a two-party system fundamentally. The smaller parties only really become relevant in a minority government situation, where those small parties have seats that the bigger ones need, because the bigger ones can't pass anything unless they have a majority, and they need support for that if they can't do it themselves. Now, The smaller parties in that context can force compromises. The NDP can say to the Liberals, hey, we'll back you up. We can do a coalition, but you have to give in to some of our demands here. The NDP likes the way that things are right now. I don't see them looking to shake things up. It makes no sense on their part. Then you have the Green Party, which unfortunately really isn't even worth mentioning with their 3 seats. Now, the Bloc can go ahead and try to bring the motion up still, but I would be shocked if it passes. You need 3 parties to support it, and each of those parties has no logical basis for even giving the support in the first place. They both stand to lose, really. The best you can hope for is maybe bringing up the idea to scare Trudeau into making better deals with you, so you're not actively looking for this type of outcome. But even there, I can just see Trudeau laughing at it. In reality, he stands to probably win the most if this goes through. I can really see him either maintaining the minority or earning the majority. This then begs another question though. Why would the Bloc pursue this strategy anyways? The only strategic point that makes sense to me is they want more seats and thus more power for themselves. Trudeau is deep in scandal. The Conservatives don't have a leader and need time to organize. The NDP got slaughtered last election and they aren't earning any goodwill back. All they're really doing so far is complaining and trying to rack up the deficit. Canada isn't really too fond of them at this point in time. The Bloc can easily look around and say, hey, most parties right here aren't in a strong position right now. This could be our chance to earn a record number of seats, perhaps even all of Quebec. What are the alternatives really? The scandal-ridden Trudeau government, the Conservative Party with no leader, the NDP? Well, the Bloc could be enticing to some people in that scenario. More enticing than in virtually any other circumstance. This here is the perfect storm for them. Now, as we laid out, I don't really think they'll even get the chance to pursue that strategy. I doubt that an election will be called. The votes just won't be there, but I can see why they would want it. And it also brings into focus the Bloc and their own ideological failings. First of all, they aren't really based in ideas per se. They are a manifestation of identity politics, something that I abhor. The roots of the party aren't something like liberalism, conservatism, socialism like with the NDP, environmentalism even. Instead, they are based on immutable characteristics of being Quebecois, or French Canadian. I can't be that. I am not a French Canadian. Barring me uprooting my whole life, moving to Quebec, mastering the language, and even then, probably still having problems, it wouldn't work out. That isn't a thing. Yet, anyone can be liberal or conservative or even a socialist if they want to. It's less about what you are and more about what you think. This is a powerful distinction, and it begins to spell out the idiocy of identity as your basis for politics. It's exclusionary by nature, and it forces you into tribal thinking, to view the world as something like a zero-sum game where your in-group needs to accumulate as many resources as possible versus those of your perceived enemy, whatever that would be. The English Canadians versus the French, however you want to break that down. I would never want the Bloc to have any semblance of true power at the federal level because we know what they would do. They wouldn't do what's best for all Canadians. They would work for the interest of Quebec. If there was, for example, a motion that we could see visibly would have great effects across Canada, except maybe a couple provinces would suffer a little bit, but the net gain would be tremendous. Any other party would probably go with that because they're thinking about Canada as a whole. They have constituents everywhere, but the Bloc would be the only group who might oppose it because if it doesn't favor Quebec, who cares about the rest of Canada? We know where their interests lie, and it's not conducive to a federal party. The primary motivation wouldn't be what's best for all Canadians. That wouldn't be the first question that pops into their mind. They would work for the interests of Quebec primarily. Perhaps they would mix in the broad Canadian policies there too to amass the identity politics, but their motivations will always be in a hierarchy, and they will be clear to us. At the federal level, that type of thinking isn't compatible with the task at hand. You are the country's leader, not a province's. That is the job of a premier, not the prime minister at the federal level. It would be equally silly to have something like the Canadian Party of Ontario at the federal level, or an Alberta Party, or a BC Party. All of these groups would be chiefly concerned with their own interests at the federal level. That doesn't make any sense. What is the point of being a country then? It is one thing to be tied to an ideology, which already isn't amazing. You would be much better off to develop an openness to good ideas in general, regardless of where they come from, some type of centricism, because being rigid in your beliefs and your ideology just further perpetuates polarization and all of the other nasty consequences that are tearing apart much of the Western world right now. But even there, to go one level beyond that, to make identity the basis for your politics, is even more disastrous, because now you've gone from ideology, which anyone can share in, to these immutable characteristics being the fundamental pillar of your belief structure. At the very least, with the strict ideological frameworks, anyone can join them if you develop the same understanding. There is some way to convert people to your side. Things like the free speech and debate aspect of a society can still be maintained, but with immutable traits, that isn't the case, and it will de facto force intense tribalism into the political system because there's no compromise there. Now, I would say that with luck, the Bloc would never get too big, as their fundamental principles don't make any sense for a federal party, but ironically, their own stance limits their scope. They really don't have a shot. They only appeal to people in Quebec, and for good reason. That is what their agenda is based around. Unless they abandon that singular focus, how can they ever hope to have a significant sway at the federal level without the rest of Canada? Now, of course, I will temper this by saying the Bloc could have very real reasons for feeling like their interests were not heard. Of course, Canada, for the most part, is English speaking. We do have the French component there too, but it probably has been neglected to some degree. To feel like you'd be best served by having a party that just focuses on that, I can see where it comes from, but it's not the best way to go about it. The proper way would have been to have your MPs, who aren't bound by identity, speaking up for this part of the system. That has to be changed, because the system really isn't just only that one aspect, but it does deserve attention. I am perfectly open to hearing that argument, but I would say the answer isn't to force tribalism upon the political system. It's to fix the issues that need fixing. And compromise should be had. I'm perfectly willing to hold Trudeau accountable for not doing all the things he should be doing to make Quebec feel more Canadian. I don't want them to separate. I think separatism is a bad idea for everyone. It weakens Canada, and it will definitely weaken Quebec too. To do things to make everyone feel welcome on a province-wide basis is a good thing that we should be exploring, because the Bloc really was a byproduct of that sentiment. Feeling like the system isn't representing you, and therefore you need your own group in there that isn't based on ideology, but is specifically designed to tailor to your identity as Quebecois. If things were better formulated, you might not feel like you need that to begin with. The problem could have very well been real, but the response wasn't the best in my opinion. To drag things down into tribalism is never a good thing, because it blinds you. It doesn't let you do your job optimally, especially at the federal level, because federally, you're responsible for all of Canada, not just Quebec. And that really is the bottom line. As a government official, you have constituents who you are responsible for. And you are responsible for all of them within that border, whether it's locally, provincially, or across all of Canada. You have a duty. And to go into that duty with a blinder that already predetermines you to fail your job is no way to go about finding a solution. Now let's just move on to my closing predictions here. How is this really going to play out? Well, the Bloc already laid out the ultimatum, so I doubt they back off. Once you issue an ultimatum, there really isn't a going back. If you say Trudeau resign, or we're going to try and force the election, you have to follow through there, or else you look kind of weak and silly. Why would you even bring it up in the first place? So, Trudeau is going to see that, and he's going to laugh at the request for his resignation. He's going to reject it. There is no way he resigns because of this. He's going to hold on to office and ride it out. Then, the Bloc will say, okay, they called the bluff expectedly, so we're going to try and find support now for pushing an election. They're going to go to the Conservatives, to the NDP, and they're going to get turned down because the Conservatives are not poised right now to go into an election, and the NDP is okay with the way things are currently. They don't want a Liberal majority, which could happen, because it would cut them out of the equation. Now, Trudeau's going to remain the PM until the pandemic ends. Then there might be a shot, if you really want to, at hosting a new election. There is no way this thing works out favorably for anybody during a pandemic, but once things are more stable and people can once again think about politics, then maybe you have your shot. There could be an opportunity there, and I expect the Conservatives to be formed at that point. The NDP might be thinking differently, and who knows what could happen, but right now, nothing's going to go down. This conversation will definitely rise up again, because that comes with being a minority government. People are looking for ways to topple you, but I can't see it playing out as the Bloc wants it to. It's just not in the cards. So, with that, it now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. It'll help us grow. And you can also find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.